Winter Sky, Broken Doctrine, January 11, 1944. 26,000 feet above central Germany. The cold is immediate and unforgiving. It slips through flight gloves, stiffens fingers around throttles and triggers, and turns every breath inside the oxygen mask into frost. The sky is a dull, endless gray, scarred by long white contrails that crisscross like chalk marks on slate. Below, the ground is barely visible through broken cloud, a blurred patchwork of fields and frozen rivers. Above, the bomber stream grinds forward, engine noise merging into a single, metallic roar that vibrates through bone and aluminum alike. 30B, 17 flying fortresses fly in tight formation, wings almost overlapping, each aircraft scarred from earlier missions. Some trail faint smoke. One leaks fuel that fans out behind it like a dark ribbon. Inside the bombers, crews are silent except for clipped intercom calls. Gunners scan the empty sky, knowing from experience that empty never lasts long. Then the warning comes. Fighters. 12 o'clock high. Closing fast. From the haze ahead, dark shapes grow rapidly larger. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s climb into position with practiced ease, noses angled slightly downward, sunlight glinting off canopies and wings. They are calm. They have done this before. They know the math. The Luftwaffe head-on attack is brutally simple. Come straight through the formation at closing speeds over 500 miles per hour. Fire cannon and machine guns in a concentrated burst. Break away at the last instant. Repeat. The bombers have no true forward-firing guns. Their nose turrets offer only seconds to aim, lead, and fire. Most never get a clean shot. By the winter of 1943, everyone knows this. The German pilots know it. The American bomber crews know it. And the casualty lists prove it. Losses on some missions have reached levels that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Entire squadrons vanish over targets like Schweinfurt and the Ruhr Valley. Crews count missions the way prisoners count days, hoping to survive long enough to finish a tour. This is the height of the combined bomber offensive. The 8th Air Force believes in daylight precision bombing, in tight formations and mutual firepower, in the promise of the Norden bomb site. In theory, mass B-17s can fight their way to the target and back. In practice, without fighter cover deep into Germany, they are exposed. On this morning, the escort is thin. The long-range fighters that will one day change the air war are still too few. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings have already turned back, fuel gauges forcing hard decisions far behind the bomber stream. Only a handful of P-51 Mustangs have the legs to reach this far, and they are scattered, pulled into separate fights as German interceptors probe for weakness. One of those Mustangs belongs to First Lieutenant James H. Howard. Howard is 30 years old, older than most fighter pilots in the 8th Air Force. He flies with the 354th Fighter Squadron, part of the 355th Fighter Group. His P-51 is clean and fast, its Merlin engine humming steadily as he scans the sky. He is on his 23rd mission. He has survived combat in another war, in another sky, long before most of the men around him ever put on a uniform. The mission is already unraveling. Cloud cover over the north sees scattered formations on the way in. Radio calls overlap and fade into static. Escorts break to chase targets of opportunity. The bomber stream stretches, gaps opening between groups that should never be alone. Howard is engaged briefly with a pair of German fighters, forcing them away from a damaged B-17. He checks his fuel. It is lower than he would like. Every minute at combat power burns precious gallons he will need to get home. He looks for his flight. They are gone, pulled east in another fight. Then he sees them. Off to the west, slightly below, a compact group of bombers drifts out of the mainstream. About 30 aircraft, tight but isolated, their contrails thinning as they lose altitude. Beneath them, climbing steadily, are German fighters. At least a dozen. More may be hidden in the clouds. Howard does not need a radio call to understand what he is seeing. The geometry is clear. The Germans are positioning for a textbook head-on attack. The bombers have minutes. Perhaps less. He checks his instruments again. Fuel is marginal. Ammunition is full, but it will not stay that way for long. He looks around the sky for other escorts. There are none. This is not a situation covered in any manual. Escort doctrine is explicit. Fighters protect bombers from the outside. They intercept attackers before they reach the formation. They do not linger. They do not get slow. They certainly do not take on a numerically superior enemy alone. Howard knows what turning back means. He will likely make it home. The bombers will not. Inside the B-17s, the crews see the fighters below and brace themselves. Gunners tighten harnesses. Pilots grip yokes. There is no room to maneuver without breaking formation and becoming an easier kill. They wait for the first streaks of cannon fire to tear into aluminum skin. Above them, a single Mustang rolls inverted and dives. Howard pushes the throttle forward and points his nose toward the bombers. He does not call for help. There is no time. He has made his decision. The German fighters hesitate for just a moment, surprised by the lone escort angling in at full speed. It is a small hesitation, barely noticeable. But in the air war over Europe, moments like that matter. Howard closes the distance rapidly, the bombers swelling in his windscreen, the enemy fighters growing sharper by the second. He is about to do something no one expects, something no doctrine allows, something that will either save 30 bombers or get him killed in the next few minutes. The long road to this moment. James Howard does not think of himself as brave as he dives toward the bombers. His mind is calm, almost detached, the way it always becomes when the variables line up and demand an answer. Speed, altitude, numbers, angles. He has lived inside problems like this before, long before Europe, long before the cold gray sky over Germany. As the Mustang descends, his thoughts flicker briefly, not backward in time, but inward, to habits built over years. Howard was born in 1913 in Canton, China, the son of American missionaries. His childhood was spent far from certainty, in a place where improvisation was survival and plans rarely survive contact with reality. His father ran a medical mission. His mother taught school. Supplies were limited. Help was distant. Problems were solved with whatever was at hand. He learned early that rules were useful, but only until they failed. When he returned to the United States for college, he chose pre-med at Pomona, but aviation pulled at him harder than textbooks ever did. In 1937, he joined the Navy as an aviation cadet, only to be grounded by a minor medical issue. For many men, that would have ended the story. For Howard, it was only a detour. He went back to China. In 1941, he joined the American volunteer group, the Flying Tigers, flying P-40 Warhawks against Japanese aircraft over Burma and southern China. The AVG lived on the edge of collapse. They were outnumbered, undersupplied, and isolated. Spare parts were scavenged. Tactics were invented in the air. Survival depended on understanding not just your own aircraft, but the enemy's habits and fears. Howard thrived there. He learned to fight asymmetrically. He learned to dive when others climbed, to disengage when others chased kills, and to turn positioning into a weapon. He was credited with 6 aerial victories in 6 months. More important than the numbers, he survived. When the Flying Tigers disbanded in mid-1942, Howard returned to the United States and joined the Army Air Forces. He expected the Pacific. Instead, he was sent to England and assigned to fly P-51 Mustangs with the 8th Air Force. By late 1943, the Mustang was proving itself, but it had not yet changed the war. There were too few of them. Losses among the bombers continued to mount. Howard watched mission after mission where courage and discipline were not enough. He listened to bomber crews talk about head-on attacks, about seeing German fighters coming straight at them with no way to stop them. He studied the reports. He noticed patterns. Now, over Germany, all of that experience converges in a single instant. Howard levels out just ahead of the isolated bomber formation. The B-17s loom massive and slow compared to his sleek fighter. He can see faces in the cockpits, oxygen masks and frost-rimmed goggles. Some gunners swing their turrets toward him instinctively, fingers resting near triggers. They do not know what he is doing. Neither do the Germans. Below, The Luftwaffe fighters adjust their climb, spreading slightly, preparing to roll into the attack. They expect the Mustang to pass through, to take a shot and run, or to be driven off by weight of numbers. Howard does neither. Instead of pulling up and away, he reduces throttle. The Mustang shudders slightly as he bleeds speed. He slides closer to the bombers, closer than escort doctrine ever allowed. He positions himself low and centered, just ahead of the lead aircraft, his silhouette stark against the pale sky. He has made himself unavoidable. The first German pair commits. They roll over from high 12 o'clock and dive, cannons armed, closing at terrifying speed. For a split second, it looks like a collision course. Howard holds steady, resisting every instinct to brake early. He waits until the geometry collapses into a single line. Then he fires. A short, controlled burst. Tracers reach out and snap past the lead Messerschmitt. The German pilot flinches. He has no room. The Mustang is directly in his path. To continue the run means risking a head-on collision with an armed fighter at combined speeds that leave no margin for escape. He breaks off. The second fighter follows. The attack dissolves. Howard climbs just enough to clear the bomber's slipstream, then slides back into position. Inside the B-17s, something shifts. The crews realize he is not lost. He is not damaged. He is deliberately placing himself between them and the enemy. The Germans regroup quickly. They try again, this time from the side. Howard rolls, meets them, fires just enough to force separation. They try a steeper dive. He climbs into it, forcing an overshoot. He never chases. He never leaves the bombers. Minutes stretch into an eternity. Each pass costs Howard fuel he does not have. His ammunition counters tick downward. Small caliber rounds punch through his fuselage. The Mustang shivers, but the engine keeps running. His hands ache from tension and cold. His vision narrows, the world shrinking to airspeed, angle, and movement. The bomber crews adapt. Gunners hold fire when Howard maneuvers through their arcs. Pilots call out threats over the radio, even though they do not know if he can hear them. An unspoken coordination forms, born not from orders, but from necessity. For half an hour, one fighter becomes a moving barrier. Eventually, the Germans begin to disengage. Not all at once. One pair at a time. They have burned fuel. They have lost their clean attack runs. The bombers are nearing the edge of the target area, where Allied fighters will soon return. Howard watches the last shapes peel away and vanish into cloud. His fuel gauge is nearly empty. He eases the Mustang out of the formation. The lead B-17 waggles its wings. Howard answers with a brief dip of his own. Then he turns west and begins the long, quiet flight home, knowing the most dangerous part of the mission may not be over yet. 30 minutes alone. The sky feels larger now, emptier, as Howard turns away from the bombers. The adrenaline that held him steady begins to drain, leaving behind a sharp awareness of every vibration in the aircraft. The Mustang's engine note is uneven, a subtle cough that tells him what the fuel gauge already has. He is running on reserve, on fumes measured in minutes. He trims the aircraft carefully, leaning the mixture until the engine protests, then easing it back just enough to keep it alive. His altimeter unwinds slowly as he trades height for distance. There is no room for error. If the engine quits too soon, he will be forced to bail out over occupied territory or attempt a dead-stick landing in unfamiliar fields. Behind him, far to the east, the bombers continue toward their target. They are still intact. All 30. Howard does not allow himself to dwell on that. Flying demands presence, not reflection. He keeps his eyes moving, scanning for late interceptors, for stragglers hoping to catch a wounded fighter limping home. Every shadow in the clouds feels like a threat. The engine sputters again. He adjusts the mixture, nudging the propeller pitch, coaxing life out of metal and fuel that no longer want to cooperate. The Mustang responds grudgingly. He holds his breath without realizing it, then forces himself to exhale slowly. Panic wastes oxygen and judgment. He has learned that lesson the hard way. The English coast eventually emerges through the haze, a thin dark line against the sea. Relief threatens to overwhelm him, but he pushes it aside. Too many pilots have died within sight of safety. At 2,000 feet, he crosses the shoreline. The engine coughs one final time and settles into a rough, uneven idle. He does not try to reach his home field. He turns toward the nearest strip he can find. The landing is heavy but controlled. The Mustang rolls, shudders, and finally stops. The engine dies completely, as if offended that it was asked to do even that much more. Howard sits still for several seconds, hands resting on the throttle and stick. Only when ground crew are running toward him does he unstrap and climb down. They stare at the aircraft first. Bullet holes pepper the wings, the tail, the fuselage. The engine is hot, the tank's nearly dry. They look at him next. He is unhurt. Howard files his report with the same economy he applies to everything else. He notes the bomber formation, the number of enemy fighters, the maneuver he used to disrupt the attacks. He does not speculate. He does not exaggerate. To him, it was a problem encountered and solved, nothing more. The bomber crews tell a different story. When they land, intelligence officers hear the same account again and again. A lone Mustang. 30 minutes of continuous defense. Head-on attacks broken up at the last instant. A fighter flying so close that they could see the pilot's helmet as he crossed their nose. They count at least 14 enemy fighters engaged. Some swear it was more. All agree on one thing. Without that single escort, they would not have made it back. Word spreads quickly through the 8th Air Force. In briefing rooms and mess halls, the story grows sharper with each telling. A fighter pilot who stayed when every rule said to leave. A maneuver no one had seen before. Commanders listen carefully, separating exaggeration from fact. At headquarters, reports are cross-checked. Times match. Locations align. The German attacks line up with known intercept patterns. What Howard describes should not have worked. But it did. And in a war where bomber losses threaten to break morale and momentum, results matter. Howard is summoned, questioned, and released. No one reprimands him. No one praises him, either. Not yet. The implications of what he did are still sinking in. Weeks later, the recognition comes. In April 1944, James H. Howard is awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation speaks of extraordinary heroism, of gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. It notes that he defended a formation of bombers against overwhelming odds and saved them from destruction. It does not mention the quiet calculation behind the act. It does not mention geometry or psychology or the deliberate use of risk as a tool. Those details live elsewhere. They live in the conversations among fighter pilots who begin to question old assumptions. In training sessions where instructors talk about presence as much as firepower. In missions where escorts fly closer, more aggressively, occupying space the enemy expects to be empty. The Luftwaffe notices the change. Captured German pilots speak of American fighters that refuse to be drawn away, that sit directly in the path of an attack and force hesitation. The head-on pass, once so effective, becomes more dangerous. More attacks are broken off. More bombers survive. The shift is not instantaneous. Many factors shaped the air war in 1944. More Mustangs arrive. German pilot quality declines. Fuel shortages limit interceptions. But something has changed in the mindset of escort pilots. Howard returns to combat. He flies more missions, trains younger pilots, and continues to fight without fanfare. By the end of the war, he will add 6 confirmed victories in Europe to the 6 he earned with the Flying Tigers. His tally will never make him famous. His impact already has. When the enemy adapts. As spring turns to summer in 1944, the air war over Europe begins to feel different. Not easier, not safer, but altered, as if the rules that govern survival have been quietly rewritten. Bomber formations still take losses, but fewer vanish outright. Crews return with stories not just of flak and fighters, but of escorts that never leave them, fighters that seem welded to the formation from the channel to the target and back again. James Howard does not claim credit for this shift. He rarely speaks of January 11th at all. He returns to flying as if nothing fundamental has changed, yet around him the tactics do. Escort briefings emphasize anticipation instead of reaction. Pilots are told to think about where the enemy wants to be, not where he is now. The head-on attack is dissected in detail. Its strengths are acknowledged. Its weaknesses are finally discussed. The weakness is commitment. To execute a head-on pass, a German fighter must commit early, line up perfectly, and accept enormous risk in the final seconds. Howard's maneuver exploited that risk. By occupying the space directly in front of the bombers, he forced German pilots to decide between collision and abort. No amount of skill could remove that dilemma. Other pilots begin to test variations of the idea. Not alone, not recklessly, but in pairs and flights. They position themselves closer to the bombers, slightly forward, slightly offset, creating uncertainty where certainty once ruled. German attacks still come, but they are less clean. More break off early. More fighters overshoot or waste energy repositioning. Inside the Luftwaffe, the change is felt immediately. Veteran German pilots, already strained by losses and fuel shortages, now face escorts that refuse to behave predictably. The clean geometry of the head-on attack collapses into messy, dangerous close quarters. Reports from fighter units complain of American escorts that block approach paths and force last-second evasive maneuvers. The psychological balance shifts. For bomber crews, the effect is profound. They begin to believe that survival is not purely random. They trust their escorts. They fly tighter. They hold formation under fire. Confidence, fragile as it is, becomes a weapon of its own. Howard continues to fly through this period, but his role gradually changes. He is used less as a frontline spear and more as a mentor. Younger pilots gravitate toward him, drawn by his calm and his willingness to explain not just what to do, but why. He tells them that air combat is not about aggression alone. It is about forcing the enemy into bad choices, about being where you are least expected at the moment it matters most. He does not tell them to fly into bomber formations. He understands the risk too well. What he teaches instead is judgment. By late 1944, the balance of air power has decisively shifted. Long-range escorts now accompany bombers deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe is struggling to maintain trained pilots and operational aircraft. The head-on attack, once devastating, is no longer decisive. Howard flies his final combat missions without incident. He has survived 2 air wars on opposite sides of the world. When the fighting ends, he remains in the Air Force, choosing continuity over celebration. He rises steadily through the ranks, respected more for his intellect than for his decorations. He commands, plans, and trains. The Medal of Honor is rarely mentioned. To him, it represents a moment when circumstances demanded a solution, nothing more. Decades later, as jet aircraft replace propellers and new doctrines replace old ones, Howard's name fades from popular memory. He is not the kind of hero who fits easily into legend. There are no dramatic kill counts, no flamboyant stories of lone wolf dogfights. Yet his influence persists quietly. Instructors tell the story in fragments. A lone Mustang. A broken assumption. A reminder that dominance in the air is as much about denying the enemy his preferred options as it is about destroying him outright. Howard retires in 1966 as a brigadier general. He settles into a quiet life in Florida. When asked about the mission that earned him the Medal of Honor, he deflects. He says he was lucky. He says anyone else would have done the same. Those who were there know better. The measure of what endures. Time has a way of smoothing the sharp edges of war, but for the men who flew in bombers over Germany, some memories never dull. Long after the engines have gone silent and the uniforms folded away, they remember the sound of cannon fire ripping past their noses. They remember the way the sky seemed to rush toward them in a head-on attack. And some of them remember, with absolute clarity, the moment a single Mustang appeared where no fighter was supposed to be. Letters begin to arrive years later. They come from former gunners, navigators, pilots, men who had gone back to farms, factories, offices, and families. Men who had not spoken much about the war at all. They write to James Howard to say thank you. Some explain that they had assumed no one noticed what happened that day. Others admit they had never believed they would live past that mission. Howard answers a few. Most, he files away quietly. He never corrects the way the story grows in the telling. He never tries to center himself in it. To him, The mission is inseparable from the context that created it. The bombers were vulnerable. The enemy had adapted. The doctrine was incomplete. He simply occupied the gap. Historians eventually take notice. In after-action analyses and post-war studies, January 11th, 1944 appears as a footnote at first, then as a case study. Not because it represents a tactic to be copied, but because it illustrates a mindset. Howard did not defeat the Luftwaffe that day. He disrupted it. He did not destroy 14 fighters. He denied them clean attacks. That distinction matters. Modern air combat doctrine increasingly emphasizes control of space and decision-making over raw attrition. The goal is not always to shoot down the enemy, but to force him into suboptimal choices. Howard understood that instinctively, decades before it became formalized language. The maneuver he used is never officially codified. It remains too dependent on individual judgment, too dangerous to institutionalize. But its spirit lives on. Pilots are taught to think in 3 dimensions, to anticipate rather than react, to recognize that sometimes the most powerful move is to be exactly where the enemy does not want you. Howard's career continues quietly after the war. He serves in staff roles, command positions, and planning billets. He watches the air force change around him, jets replacing propellers, radar, and missiles reshaping combat. Through it all, he remains the same measured, analytical officer. When he retires, there is no grand farewell. He leaves behind a service transformed by technology and experience, and he carries with him memories he rarely shares. As the years pass, reunions thin. Fewer veterans remain to tell the stories firsthand. Yet among those who do, the account of the lone Mustang endures. It is told not as a tale of glory, but as proof that intelligence and courage can intersect in a single decisive moment. Howard lives to see the war recede into history books and documentaries. He watches younger generations try to understand a conflict that shaped the world they inherited. He offers no sweeping judgments. When pressed, he returns to the same idea. He did what the situation required. The space between rules and reality. In the final years of his life, James Howard remains a quiet figure. He lives far from airfields and briefing rooms, in the soft heat of Florida, where the sky is wide and peaceful and no one looks up expecting contrails or fighters. When people recognize his name, it is usually in passing, as a line in a book or a footnote in a documentary. He does not correct them. He does not elaborate. Those who knew him best understand that this was always his way. When Howard dies in 1995 at the age of 81, his funeral is attended by men whose hair has gone white and whose backs are bent by time. Some of them once sat in unheated bombers over Germany. Some once flew fighters alongside him. They do not speak of doctrine or medals. They speak of trust, of the moment when a situation felt hopeless and then did not. They speak of January 11th, 1944, of a winter sky over Germany where logic failed and then was rebuilt in an instant, of a lone Mustang that stayed when every sensible calculation said to leave, of a pilot who understood that the most dangerous assumption in war is that the enemy will behave the way you expect. Howard's legacy is not a maneuver. It is not a kill count. It is not even the Medal of Honor citation that bears his name. His legacy is the idea that war is shaped not just by machines or orders, but by the human mind under pressure. He showed that courage without thought is wasteful, and thought without courage is useless. Only together can they change outcomes. The bomber crews he saved carried that lesson with them long after the war ended. Some named their sons after him. Some wrote letters decades later, unsure if they would ever be read. Some simply told the story again and again, because it reminded them that survival had not been random. In the vast machinery of World War II, where millions moved and died according to plans drawn far from the front, James Howard's moment stands out because it was personal. One man, one aircraft, one decision made without permission or precedent. He occupied a space that no one else had considered. And in doing so, he forced an enemy to hesitate, a formation to survive, and a doctrine to evolve. That is the lesson he left behind. Not that rules should be ignored, but that they should be understood deeply enough to know when they no longer apply. Not that heroism is loud or obvious, but that sometimes it looks like a pilot holding position in freezing air, doing math at 600 miles an hour. The war moved on. The sky changed. New machines replaced old ones. But on that winter morning over Germany, clarity and courage intersected, and 30 bombers flew home.